right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for spending time here today. Great to see so many people. So I'm John Mallinder. I'm one of the chief data architects at Microsoft and been there for just under 10 years and work with our strategic and enterprise customers. So over my time, worked with about 70 plus customers and probably designed some of the largest platforms with the Microsoft Azure customers in the UK. And so today we wanted to take some time to talk about federated data platforms, the why, the what, and the how. Now bearing in mind I've only got 30 minutes here today, so it's going to be a bit of a whirlwind tour, but nonetheless I hope I can give you some interesting insights and experiences from, journeys I've done with my customers. So it starts off with a group a while ago conducted a survey to understand the obstacles preventing organizations from becoming data and AI driven. And there's some really interesting trends there that absolutely resonate with the journeys I see organizations go on. Firstly, the company culture does not yet recognize the need. I really find this goes hand in hand with difficulties in identifying appropriate business use cases. There's underlying understanding of how to prioritize and identify the business value to justify it. And because of this deprioritization, we then often see challenges with lack of skilled individuals, hiring the right individuals, and we just end up in this situation where we're not really investing enough in the data platform, such that when leadership does want to jump on a new business opportunity, on a new disruptive technology, they're trying to do it on the back of a poor data foundation. 9 times out of 10, it has very little to do with the technology, right? This is an issue of strategy and prioritization. And that's why, as a corporate cliche buzzword as it is, digital transformation is such a critical part of this journey. It's really for senior leadership to stand up and talk about the culture, about the direction. We want to encourage the business to really be critical, creative, and rethink the way we conduct our business. So whilst that direction will come from top down, the actual insights, the innovation will come from bottom up. People who own the operations and the processes, they're the ones who can see the inefficiencies, the opportunities. So this truly is a team sport. A little while ago, Satya co-authored this white paper that goes into more depth, but the thing that's really worth calling out from that paper is looking at it from an empirical standpoint. When they look at organizations that can capitalize on this data, capitalize on the data to re-innovate themselves, they stand head and shoulders above the competition who couldn't capitalize on that data. So the question really is, how do we help IT and OT converge across the business to kind of find these new insights? What kind of operating model do we need? And what kind of platform supports that journey? And there are many frameworks out there. I've created 2 myself, Enterprise-Ready Analytics and Harmonized Mesh, and there are many, many more. But I find it's useful to take a step back and to think of it in terms of a spectrum, right? So one extreme of the spectrum, we have highly centralized type of platforms, and the other end, highly decentralized. Looking at centralized, typical of an on-prem type of environment, just because of the sheer complexity and effort to stand up the operating model and the platform. If you think about the data center, the networking, the plumbing, the software, the support, it ends up being central IT. Now, because one team is on point, it is easier to enforce a certain posture for compliance and governance. The downside is you very often end up with a bottleneck, right? We've got one team on point to address all the variety and the speed of the needs coming from the business. And sooner than later, you're going to have to triage, and some things get left behind. And so I actually find the further organizations push down the centralized route, this spectrum actually wraps around. So you push them down, you actually inadvertently end up back on the decentralized side, because you'll have disgruntled business customers now more than ever in the era of cloud and SaaS. You can whip out a credit card, get 2 or 3 contractors, and hey presto, you can spin up your own mini data platform. And this is so empowering, this is so agile, but there are many drawbacks of doing that. Looking at it from a transparency standpoint, you now no longer know what's actually available within your organization. Even if you do, you've now got an integration challenge on your hands because you have to figure out how these potentially incompatible systems can be integrated. From a posture and compliance standpoint, it's a nightmare trying to enforce a common baseline across a fragmented estate. And then the most important one is when you look at it from an all-up organization-wide standpoint, whilst individually you're quite fast and nimble, as an organization you're now going to be held back because of all the aforementioned reasons, right? So you're actually paying a price. So as with many things in life, I find truth is somewhere in the middle, and Federation has proven itself time and time again because it's able to balance that political people aspect with the technical agility. And really what I mean by that is that the central team in effect becomes a market regulator, right? They think about the blueprints, the rules of engagement, the patterns, and then they define the domains. And figuring out what the domains are in the organization is actually a very important part, and actually in many cases difficult, because you're not just looking at the source systems, you're also looking at the people and processes. But the domains are the ones that actually then operationalize the data. They're the ones who onboard these data assets and publish them out to this internal data market. So they're in effect becoming data providers in this space. So to expand on really what makes Federation successful, and this is not something I've seen written down, this is just from personal experience, I find there are 3 golden rules. We've got common governance, common interoperability, and common identity. Sacrifice any one of these, and you're going to find yourself on a slippery slope to becoming a decentralized platform. So to expand on that, talking about data governance, or common governance, sorry, especially in a federated context, we need to be very crystal clear who is accountable for a given data asset. We're not just talking about copying the data in, we're talking about the metadata, the data health, the access permissions, the life cycle of that data. Secondly, we need an evidence-based approach to verify the health of this data and the data quality. So when I say data health, I'm talking about more the metadata associated with the data, and then with quality, I'm talking about the actual technical data quality of said data. Certification endorsement tiers. So as I was saying earlier, actually a lot of the insights, a lot of the intuitions are with folk in the business. And we absolutely want to encourage them and support them with their self-service journey to go off and explore these hunches, to go and consume this data, remove the blockers, give them the tooling to really validate these intuitions. We also want to allow them to publish these insights back, but we need to be clear, these are ad hoc insights. They haven't necessarily gone through the full ratified data validation pipeline, right? So you compare that to maybe your year-end financials. You want to make sure that when someone goes into the catalog, they can clearly see what's been endorsed, what's been certified, what is an ad hoc kind of best guess. And then finally, policy-based guardrails, moving towards a declarative, proactive posture. We're actually using policies to enforce guardrails, right? So on a platform standpoint, actually looking at the infrastructure, this could be things like enforcing encryption, network isolation, types of identity. On the data side of the equation, it could be things like curating the data, the metadata, the data health aspect. Then we have common interoperability. So we're talking about this internal data market, and we have to think about how do different groups within the organization collaborate. These different groups could be used in different engines, right? You can't impose the same tool on everyone. Some people want to use time series, some people want to use graph, who knows? But what we want to avoid is a kind of a Russian doll of data integration where you're creating data duplication across the estate to support this interoperability. You want to strive for in-place access. And then finally, common identity. Something that we don't really talk about very often, but really what is the entitlement story end to end? Will you be able to, in this federated context, be able to say who has done what and who can do what, right? In many cases, I've seen different groups in an organization. Some will use SaaS keys, some will use service principals, others will use SSO. It turns into a hot mess from an auditing standpoint to figure out who's done what. So, leadership will typically turn around and say like, yep, this is what we need. We need federation. This aligns with our problems. But you always end up with this one group who will then say, well, do we really trust anyone but us to touch that data, right? And there are two parts to this. First of all, there is a cultural shift, and there's going to be a change management. It's human nature to resist change. But the second one is, when you look at the platform, there are actually many layers involved. From the onboarding of the data, the curation of the data, the consumption, the publishing of that data. So as an organization, it's a conversation to have around, well, what layer do we want to federate, right? So for a small to medium-sized organization, you may say, we just don't have the skills to federate out all the data engineering. So we're going to opt for a center of excellence to do that initial onboarding from business critical systems. However, from the publishing and consumption layer, building out ad hoc reports, domain-specific reports, we're going to federate that out to the different business domains. A larger or a more digitally mature organization, on the other hand, may say, we want to push that federation further back, right? Especially when you're dealing with company of companies, with a lot of reorgs, mergers and divestitures, having these effectively mini data platforms operated by business IT that contain all the capabilities, the code, the data for a particular functional area actually makes reorging, mergers and divestitures much easier than trying to unpick massive monolithic platforms. But in either case, no matter where you kind of draw that federation line, there are going to be elements that remain with central IT, such as the actual security monitoring tooling, the data governance platform, right? So this sounds great. What does it actually look like in the real world? And you just have to take a quick look at the plethora of technologies and services available to organizations today. You know, it's literally like picking out Lego bricks. We're not just talking about the data flow, we're talking about the identity, the networking, the governance, the monitoring. It is actually quite a complex aspect of the design, especially in a federated context where you may have multiple instances for a given capability. But even if you stick with first-party PaaS services, there's the same kind of penalty. Sure, the integration may be a bit easier, but you still have to think about all these different facets and how they come together and how they could be operationalized by the organization. And that is the feedback that we as Microsoft have been receiving for the last 5+ years. And that is at the very heart of what Microsoft Fabric is trying to address. Our engineering teams had to take each of our services and capabilities that you may already be familiar with. They had to think about, well, how do we actually elevate this all into a single integrated serverless SaaS platform that you don't have to muck around with the plumbing and you can get started with the actual data engineering, data value creation sooner than later. And in order to do so, we had to take all these services and in many cases re-engineer the backends. Many of these services had proprietary internal data formats, right? They had to be re-engineered to natively read and write to the One Lake. And you can think of the One Lake as the OneDrive for your enterprise data lake. It uses an open source Delta Parquet format, and there are open APIs such that, you know, if you're using first-party workloads or third-party services, they can read and write to that One Lake without invoking additional compute. But really the thing that I want to drive home here is that the concept here is that we're moving away from owning IP addresses and VNets and clusters. The thing we're interested in is, I need a notebook, I need a SQL endpoint, I need a dashboard, and Fabric should take care of the underlying plumbing to kind of materialize the compute for that. Now, Fabric went live end of last year, November 2023, and since then engineering has been adding additional workloads to the experience. So you'll see things like partner workloads for third-party ISVs, with GraphQL APIs where if you want to project an API on top of your data in the One Lake. We've got AI skills, we want to use natural language to converse with your data and you want to integrate that in a chatbot on a website or Teams. And we've got user data functions for C# and Python. So think of Azure Functions or AWS Lambda. And you know, there are many more workloads in the pipeline that are going to be released. So coming back earlier to the conversation around federation and domains, domain is actually a native construct within Fabric. Because even though Fabric is SaaS and it's tenant level, you can actually define different domains within the organizations and in fact subdomains, right? So here we've got corporate finance, we've got marketing, supply chain. In real life this would obviously be much more complex, but just for conceptual purposes. And aligned to these domains, we can then have workspaces. And workspaces are the things that actually contain the data, the code, and the artifacts to convert data to insight. So in this case, for instance, over here we've got marketing, workspace A. Those folk may actually be concerned with integrating data from third-party providers and harmonizing the structure for internal purposes, right? Workspace B could be looking at some performance reports and dashboards. Supply chain could be looking at a time series database to, explore their logistics, their manufacturing performance. Over here we've got finance using a low-no-code event-driven analytics. So really what's very empowering here is that every group can just say, this is the kind of tool that I need, and Fabric will serverlessly create that artifact within that workspace for that group. And now, for every workspace, you will see a code first and a low-no code counterpart. So it shouldn't matter if we're dealing with data engineers or we're dealing with business analysts who want a more of a low-no code type experience. We're trying to balance that with every workload, with every capability. There is a code first and a low-no code counterpart. So then, if we're looking at how does the organization collaborate, by virtue of them all talking to the one lake, it's essentially just sharing a pointer to the one lake. So it doesn't matter if it's sharing between two groups in the same department, or in fact if we're sharing across two groups sat in different parts of the organization using different engines. At the end of the day, it's using that Delta Parquet one lake location. The one thing we could now go out and do and say is you have to rip and replace your entire data estate in order to leverage this. And that's why we've got features such as mirroring, streaming, and shortcuts to integrate with your existing landscape. So with mirroring, we can create a near real-time copy of your databases. So today we support ADX, Cosmos, Postgres, SQL, and Snowflake. So you can create a near real-time copy of that data. We've got streaming. So these are real-time data sets where you can point it back to Event Hubs, IT Hub, Kinesis, PubSub, Kafka, and Confluent. And then you've got shortcuts, where you can take an existing cloud data store, such as AWS, S3, GCS, Dataverse, and you can project them into your one lake. So even though the data physically resides outside in a third-party cloud, you can use APIs of the one lake and the workloads in Fabric to interact with that data as if it all were co-located. So to kind of show you what that really looks like in our Whirlwind tour, this is the Fabric portal. We're going to go to one of our workspaces called Contoso Sales. It's quite a complex workspace, but we've got this task flow diagram which tries to illustrate the architecture of that workspace. Here we can see it's a medallion architecture. I'm clicking on the gold layer, opening up the gold lakehouse. And this is now the storage view of that lakehouse. So here we're actually looking at the individual Delta Parquet tables. And what they want to do is create a shortcut to another group of the organization. So this case, creating a shortcut internally to the one lake. We can see there's some promoted, certified, endorsed assets. Because there's so many, we're going to filter it down to the sales domain. We can see we've got lake houses, we've got warehouses, we've got time series databases, we've got mirrored databases. It's all one lake at the end of the day. So now we're shortcutting into the Snowflake database, and we're interested in the public orders table. So this shortcut creation takes anywhere from a few seconds up to a minute. And essentially what we're doing here is we're trying to create that pointer, read the metadata, and splice it into this lakehouse, even though the data still resides with, that data asset owner. And the moment they update the data or they append new data, that data will show in all the downstream locations because it's in place real-time bidirectional access. So that public orders is now showing up in this lakehouse. And we can see that data. So this is still looking at the underlying storage. So if I wanted something a bit more full fidelity, we can switch into a SQL endpoint. And at this point, we're actually spinning up a serverless SQL endpoint. We can see that same lakehouse with all of those tables. And hey presto, public orders is there ready for consumption. You can see at the top it says SQL query and visual query. So even the SQL experience, we've got a SQL code, and a visual way of creating SQL queries. Furthermore, what I can now do is I can switch into the modeling view, into the semantic model, and I can now define what the relationships are between these different data assets, right? So if someone to consume this lakehouse, rather than having to figure out all the relationships, we can actually bake that into the semantic model such that when someone's to build a report or a spreadsheet or whatever on top of it, those relationships have already been defined. I can look at what data I have available in the portal by just clicking over to the One Lake Data Hub on the left there, and it's a very similar experience. We can filter it down to domains, to workspaces, and types. So we've covered the analytical and the data sharing part of the equation using Fabric, but arguably much more important is the governance layer, especially in the context of federation. And for that purpose, we're going to talk about Purview. Now, I should caveat this. Purview is actually quite broad. It's an enterprise data governance tool. There are many different solution pillars, from data security for data loss prevention, insider risk management, what happens when you plug a USB stick on your machine, over to risk and compliance posture for record lifecycle management, covers things like SharePoint, emails, Office documents. But the one we're interested in is data governance. So data catalog, estate insights. But rest assured, Purview is much bigger than the thing I'm talking about now. It can go on-prem, third-party cloud, first and third-party data technologies. Now, by virtue of having those out-of-the-box integrations between Purview and Fabric, you can just go about your day, start to build and onboard data assets within Fabric within, say, Sales. By having that out-of-the-box live view integration, we can actually, in Purview, see the existence of that data without having to do anything. And that's really important because now we can start to drive accountability. Where's that data from? Which domain is it aligned to? Who's actually responsible for this data? Furthermore, what you can do is then submit a data classification job, which effectively uses data fingerprinting algorithms to figure out is it PII, GDPR, has it got sensitive financials, and if it does find that, it can apply sensitivity labels to say this is confidential information, thanks. And so once it's identified sensitive data, it can actually push the label back into Fabric to say, hey, we found sensitive financial information here. This data asset is now highly confidential. That can then trigger data loss prevention policies, block downloads, and also flag it in auditing reports. If someone combines it with another data asset, it will actually show up in the audit report saying, you know, there's an increased risk here. So switching over to the Purview portal, as I said earlier, the different solution experiences. We're now in the data catalog experience of Purview. Similarly to Fabric, we've got different domains. So we've got care providers, chains, finance, sales. And under sales, we can see it's got its own life cycle, it's got its own owners, it's got a health score. We've got things that are associated with that domain, such as data products, glossary terms, critical data elements. So, you know, a critical data element could be like a customer ID. It's going to manifest itself in multiple physical data sources. So rather than trying to manage them individually, we're actually going to group them together logically into this is a data name type data element. And the benefit of that is if you want to write data quality rules, it then can project them onto all the sources that contain customer ID type information. So then in the data quality tab, we can actually look at the data quality scores of all the data assets and how they roll up into data products, and how they roll up into domains and then to the tenant level. So we get these data health scores, right? And if I click into one of these domains, we can then see the health scores for by different control areas. So we're talking about discoverability, access and use, observability, value creation, is it trusted? All of these things are given scores. And so what we can then do is to look across the organization and look at which parts of the organization have got a good handle on maintaining this data, on curating this data, versus those that don't, and how is this trending over time? Are we in fact getting better, or are we struggling with it? You can even click through and it'll give you recommendations on how to improve that data health posture. So, you know, coming back to that internal data market, now we've got this really rich catalog, well populated, well curated, and this is the portal into what's available of our entire organization, right? So in this case, we're looking for some revenue data. Purview's come back with a set of results, and you know, you could go off and try and explore those results. But in this case, we're going to use Copilot to then drill down a layer deeper to kind of filter those results. So here we're saying, you know, looking for revenue data, Copilot saying, what specifically? And we're saying, well, actually profits. So it's actually gone through and it's providing a summary of a data product that would satisfy that specific need. And then once you're at it, you could say, well, you found me that, can you also find me some customer information related to profits? So because of the context, it can go off and use this natural language to then query and discover data assets within our environment. So same experience, it's providing us a summary and a link to one of the data products that could be a suitable fit. So as we open that data product, any moment, we'll see that this particular data product is actually being endorsed. We can see the owners, we can see how often it's been updated, we can see the health score, we can see the underlying data assets that make that product, we can see glossary terms, critical data elements, and specialists who are, well, domain experts for that particular data. And if I think this data fits the bill, from there I can request access to that data to kick off a workflow to gain access to, well, that data. So for a 30-minute whirlwind tour of Federation, I think we've covered some good ground. We spoke about the challenges. We spoke about Federation, the principles that make it successful. We spoke about digital transformation. We spoke about using Fabric for the internal data market and Purview for the governance. But really, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And if you're interested, we've got a stand out at Y430, just over there, you can see from here. But also reach out to your Microsoft account teams. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of Big Data London. Thanks, guys.